Hello Raptors fans and welcome back to Raptors Report. Today we will be looking at the Toronto Raptors game against the Detroit Pistons, but before we do that, we've got to talk about when does it stop? When does the bleeding stop? Are the Raptors going to remain winless for the rest of the season, or will they win a game? That is the question. Pretty unlikely that they go the rest of the season without a win, but it's very hard to determine when they will actually pick up win number 3, because they have not been able to do that since they retired Vince Carter's jersey all the way back on November the 2nd. So they've gone a couple of weeks now without a victory. And of course, they had that very brutal road trip out west where they played a bunch of very strong Western Conference teams and somehow managed to, avoid the Utah Jazz, the Portland Trail Blazers, and the New Orleans Pelicans, just a coincidence. There's nothing larger going on here. But in any case, we're going to kind of do the math here and figure out when the Raptors are going to pick up their next victory. And there are two things that really kind of determine when that will happen. The first of which is the injury problems with the Toronto Raptors. So when are key guys coming back? And number two, when do they have home games against teams that they can beat? Those two things coming together when Scottie Barnes and other players get healthy, and when do they play bad teams at home? So let's look at the schedule. The upcoming schedule, the next 5 games are against the Boston Celtics, Indiana Pacers, Minnesota Timberwolves, Cleveland Cavaliers, and Detroit Pistons. There are 2 games there that I think the Toronto Raptors have a chance in, although I think that they're still heavily unfavored for those games. The first of which is against the Indiana Pacers. The Pacers have looked kind of shaky this season. Tyrese Halliburton has not looked good at all. Of course, Pascal Siakam is very good. They've got a bunch of really strong young guys. Benedict Mathurin, the Canadian, has taken a step forward. He is looking like a potent scorer for them. And they've got a bunch of decent role players, but they're nothing to write home about, at least while Tyrese Halliburton is not playing very well. So that's a potential, although pretty heavily unfavored, especially if there are no returns from injury, which at that point I don't think that there will be. And the next one is against the Detroit Pistons. However, it is in their building. The Pistons, of course, the Raptors played last night and they had them on the ropes, and then they gave the lead back. They could have won the game, but they didn't. So it was a competitive game, and in competitive games, anything can happen. But what I have my eye on is a stretch of games at the beginning of December, starting on December the 1st. They start a 7-game homestand. And in this 7-game homestand, there will be some returns from injury, most likely. So talking about the injured players, Scottie Barnes was evaluated to be out for at least 3 weeks. Right now, he is practicing with the team with a face mask on. It still looks kind of gnarly. The eye is still very bloodshot. His eye is like almost solid red. So kind of scary looking, but it looks like they're starting to drop some hints that he is on the timeline. He is on the path back to the Toronto Raptors. He's healing up. Immanuel Quickley is a very interesting case because they said that he tore a ligament in his elbow, but they were saying that he'll be evaluated in a week, which gives me a little bit of hope, although I don't know what the timeline is for that type of injury. I would have assumed that it would be longer than that, but they are saying that he could potentially return to the lineup as well. Those are the 2 big ones. Kelly Olynyk is another guy who has been absent for the team, but he is also on a timeline to return around that time as well. Those players, one of those players, maybe all 3 of those players might be available for the 7-game homestand that the Raptors have at the beginning of December. And I'll read off of the teams because there's no gimmies, but there are some teams that are struggling. So let's talk about it. The first is the Miami Heat. The Heat this season are 5-6. The Indiana Pacers, who I mentioned already, will be playing again in Toronto. They are 5-7. The Oklahoma City Thunder, probably not going to pick up a win there, although Chet Holmgren is injured. They are 11-2. They're a steamroller right now, so probably not. The Dallas Mavericks, who are also struggling, they are 5-7. Luka has been very rusty. He's been playing out of shape. The New York Knicks, who have started the season kind of on the wrong foot, although they're still a strong team with a lot of good players. the Brooklyn Nets, who have been kind of the surprise this season. They are 5-8, but I expected them to be much worse. They'll be playing on the 19th. And then the final game of the homestand is against the Houston Rockets. And the Rockets have been very good this season. They're 9-4. But if you look at that slate of opponents, there are a lot of teams that are under 500. There are a lot of teams that are still trying to figure it out. There are many teams that could drop a game against the Toronto Raptors. And when a team plays 7 home games in a row, there is a chance, and probably a pretty good one, that if you sum all of the odds of those games together, I would assume that they would win at least one of those games. So that is my prediction, that in December, at the beginning of December, if and when Scotty Barnes returns, if and when Immanuel Quickley returns, if and when Kelly Olynyk returns, the Toronto Raptors will get their 3rd win of the season, early December, and I am going to put my bet on them defeating the Indiana Pacers on December the 3rd. That is when I think that they're going to get it. Although there are some other games that they could get it as well. They could potentially, after they play the Boston Celtics in Boston, that is going to be pretty brutal. That happens tonight. After that game, they also play the Indiana Pacers November the 18th at home. So they might be able to pick that one up as early as Monday. They could get that win. But my prediction is at the beginning of December. All right. So we'll go straight into the player evaluations. And the guy you got to start with is the man in the middle. In my opinion, the best Toronto Raptor this season, Jakob Poeltl. And Jakob Poeltl had a masterclass for the Toronto Raptors. He had 25 points, 18 rebounds, 3 assists, a steal, 3 blocks, only 1 turnover, and was 12 for 20 from the field. He was fantastic. He played great defense around the rim. He was around the rim challenging shots. One of the main reason that Cade Cunningham had a difficult night, he had 15 points on 21 shots. Poeltl was one of the reasons, and he completely ate Jalen Duren's lunch. He bullied Duren. Duren shot 5 of 6 from the field, had 12 points and 8 rebounds, so you look at that and say not a bad night. Jakob Poeltl had 10 offensive rebounds. 10. He was inside pushing Duren around. Duren only had 2 offensive rebounds. Poeltl did a really good job of pushing him under the basket. He was making plays from the post, setting great screens, finishing plays. There were a lot of really nice finishes from Jakob Poeltl. When he gets the ball just inside the free throw line, he has a couple of options. One of them that I have been impressed with him this season, it looks so weird. It's like not a very attractive shot, where he does a little dribble drive. He does a little dribble drive and then he kind of scoops it into the basket. And it's not a move that you really see 7-footers make very often, but he has that in his game. And his first step's actually not that bad. He can kind of move his puppies a little bit, which is why he's good at covering the perimeter on defense. So yeah, he had an absolute masterclass, his best game of the season. He really kept the Raptors in this one. It was close mainly because of him. And you just got to give a shout out to this guy. A lot of people were saying, and have been saying, like, oh, he's not worth the pick. It was a mistake trading for him. I will agree with only one part of that, which is that it didn't make sense to trade for him because of the trajectory of the team, not because he wasn't worth a first-round pick. Jakob Poeltl, I believe, on the open market, would be able to fetch that kind of return for the way that he's playing, which is great. Literally just a very good player. The problem with the trade was the trajectory of the team. When it looked like the team was on the way out, they had a really miserable record up until the trade deadline when they traded for him. They probably should have blown the team up then, traded off OG and Siakam and Fred VanVleet while they had the chance and got a good return on them. But they brought in Poeltl, spent a first-round pick, and then, have been kind of the laughingstock of the NBA and got a lot of flack from their fan base, and rightfully so. I mean, I don't think that there have been a lot of great decisions by the front office, especially around that time. I think they made a lot of mistakes. However, when you look at Jakob Poeltl and you evaluate him from the amount that they paid for him, which was a pick, and then they obviously paid him in the offseason, he has been great. Literally the best player on the Raptors. I don't even know if you can argue it would be another player other than Poeltl this season, because he has just been that good for them. And obviously Scotty Barnes has been injured. If he was healthy, it would probably be him, but you have to tip your hat to the big man. He is bringing it almost every night on both ends of the floor. So Good job from him. Another player, the next guy we're going to talk about, had a bounce back evening, and that is RJ Barrett. The home cooking did him wonders. Coming back to his hometown, he looked like a completely different player than he did on the road trip. He had 22 points on 18 shots. He was 2 of 6 from 3, 8 of 9 from the free throw stripe, very important for him. 6 rebounds, 7 assists, 1 block, 1 turnover. Great game from RJ Barrett. Very pleased, very relieved to see him return to what I know that he can be. You know, I said that the trend was looking down for him and that it was discouraging, but I did say that I wasn't giving up on him and that I just needed to see him perform better. And last night he did perform better. He had a good night. He was the better of the two out of he and Cade Cunningham. He had a better evening. He was more efficient. I think he made more plays. Cade Cunningham, I think, had an underrated evening because of the 10 assists, but he really struggled from the field. So I think head-to-head, if you just look at the stats, other than the win and loss column, I think RJ Barrett came out ahead on that evening, so you can't really complain about that. He was also plus 14 on the game. And again, I am not a proponent of single game plus minus, okay? It is way too noisy. However, I'm going to use it here. I'm going to cheat. Plus 14, huge far cry from the last game where he was absolutely terrible. One of the worst performances I've seen from a Raptor, where he was like negative 23. And in this case, the plus minus tells the story perfectly. He was the highest plus minus player on the team, so he did a very good job. Very pleased that RJ Barrett is back to his old self, and hopefully he can continue playing like this from here on out. Defensively, he still makes mistakes, but we're not going to dwell too much on that because I want to keep it positive here. Although he did have a couple of very nice plays when he is on ball. Just a stark difference between when the player he is guarding has the ball, he looks competent on defense. Like, this guy can play defense. When it's off ball, it's another story, but we'll stop there because I want to end on a high note. We got to talk about Grady Dick. Grady Dick had a very good start to the game. 16 points on 17 shots, so not horrible from that perspective, but only 1 for 10 from 3. And this was one of those nights where 1 3 could have completely changed the game, especially at the end there. He missed 2 clutch 3-point shots. The first one in the corner when RJ Barrett set the table for him, he was wide open. He could have put the Raptors up 1 wide open shot, and he missed the shot. Very unfortunate. I did a big frowny face after that. And then there was another shot. It was more contested. It was further back. I didn't expect that one to go in. Kind of a nightmare fourth quarter for him because I was really digging his game, enjoying what he was doing up until that point. And then the wheels came off in the fourth quarter. So I even thought that he was playing good defense. I think that when he was matched up against Cade Cunningham, because there were a couple of switches, and in certain situations there was some off-ball problems as well, where he kind of got his signals crossed on defense and didn't close out to the right guy, or he called for a switch when he shouldn't have. There were a couple of issues there, but I thought when they tried to isolate against him, and even when they brought him off of a screen, he did a competent job staying attached to his man and guiding them into the help defense. So, and his shot contests, he does a little thing. I mean, a lot of players do it, but his method of contesting is the swipe, where you swipe your hand down in front of the offensive player when they're taking a shot. And it looks like it's effective for him. It's a distracting technique, and it seems to be working for him. I think that he's doing a better job contesting these days, but disappointing night for Grady Dick, especially considering the ending of the game. And another disappointing night because there are 2 shining stars for the Toronto Raptors this season who have punched way above their weight. Grady Dick being one of them, who I did not expect to take the leap he has this season. And the other guy is Ochai Agbaji, who is probably even more from left field because he has been such a fantastic player for the Raptors. And unfortunately for Agbaji, he had a kind of disappointing night on the offensive side of the ball. I think that he did a very good job on defense. Mentioned Cade Cunningham, he was one of the guys defending him. Ochai Agbaji had 9 points on 15 shots. He missed most of the threes that he took, so he was only 1 for 5 from 3. 3 rebounds, 1 assist, 2 steals, 1 turnover. Quiet night for him on the offensive side, but not for lack of trying. I think that the process was correct. I think in last season, he was way too passive on offense. He was not trying to score enough. He was not putting enough pressure on the defense. Last night was not one of those issues. 15 shots, that's good. He was trying to score. He was taking shots. He was driving to the rim. He had a bunch of attempts inside that just did not drop. was very unfortunate he was not making his layups. I think the team as a whole really did a bad job of converting layups. So it wasn't just him, but it was disappointing to see him on the offensive side of the ball last night. But on defense, the guy is just a rock. He is the best perimeter defender on the team. He is strong and sturdy. He can guard up and down the lineup. He stays attached to players. He makes them shoot over him. He can get steals. He does a very competent job. Competent is the wrong word. He does a very good job guarding the other team's best player. And last night was no exception. I know that Cade Cunningham was being guarded by a couple of different players, but Ochai Agbaji was one of them. And as I mentioned, Cade Cunningham was only 6 for 21 from the floor with 15 points. So great job from him. Very encouraged by him on defense. But on offense, I'm used to seeing Ochai Agbaji have a really efficient 15 or so points and chip in in a bunch of different ways, assists and stuff. He did have a very nice drive last night where he dimed up Jakob Poeltl. That was encouraging. I think he has a lot of potential on that end. I think that he has the ability to attack closeouts and perhaps do a little bit more with the ball in his hands. But yeah, unfortunate that he didn't have it going last night. The Pistons are a pretty good defensive team, though. Last up, Davion Mitchell. It's the same song and dance almost every night. When you get a good offensive performance from Davion Mitchell, the team looks good. He does a lot of things that you want. The downside being that he is not a good scorer, at all. So he was 2 for 9 from the field. He had 5 points. 6 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 steals, and only 2 turnovers. So it's not that he is making horrendous mistakes. He's good for a couple of silly turnovers a game where he just kind of throws the ball to the other team. But it's not chronic to the point where he's a liability in terms of turnovers. That's not the issue. The problem is that he just does not score enough. And when he tries to take more of an offensive load, he is not very efficient. The other side of the coin is that he is an excellent defender. He's super disruptive. He is really good at stopping other teams from getting into their sets. He is just such a one-way player that it's hard to justify him being the point guard. It is impossible to hate the guy because he does do so much for the team on defense, and he does do a very good job of making sure that the Toronto Raptors perimeter defense is actually solid and not a disaster like it could be. But on offense, it's hard to score efficiently, and the Toronto Raptors only scored 95 points. They only shot 36% from the field and 25% from 3. So when a team has a good offense, a lot of that is because your guards are putting pressure on the defense and making plays for other players, and not necessarily via assists. You can get an assist from doing very little. If you dribble the shot clock out to 23 seconds and toss a pass to a guy who's behind the 3-point arc and has to shoot it, has to jack up a shot, and it goes in, you get an assist for that. Did you do a good job creating, or is that just a stat? And not to take anything away from him in terms of playmaking, I don't think he's a great playmaker, but I don't think it's a disaster. But he's not creating enough chances on offense for the Toronto Raptors to be a competent offensive club. And that is a big problem. The Toronto Raptors need to be able to score efficiently out of their sets, and having a guard as one of the main ball handlers in the half court who can't score, that is a major issue for your offense. That is the position where it matters the most. Kind of discouraging. He's better than I thought he would be at the beginning of the season, but at the same time, he is simply not bringing the skill set that is necessary for a starting point guard. And hopefully, if and when he goes to the bench, he has more success there, because I don't know how much longer the Toronto Raptors can afford to have him starting at point guard. Hate to be the bearer of bad news. Next up, we'll look at the bench. The top scorer off of the bench was Jamison Battle, and I don't think he had a particularly good game outside of the 9 points from all of them 3-point makes. He did space the floor, but on defense, the Detroit Pistons, especially in the first half, were looking to attack him, just putting him in pick and roll coverage over and over again. Ron Holland kind of ate him for breakfast, And I am encouraged by his shooting. He did a good job in that department, but on defense, it is starting to get a little ugly. Not Chris Boucher's night. I'm not going to go too in depth there, but he did not have a good night. 2 points, one of 5 shooting, 7 rebounds. He did have 2 blocks, but nothing to write home about. We got the bad Chris Boucher game. Bruno Fernando also had a bad game. He had 3 points, 2 rebounds, and assist, but also 2 turnovers in 10 minutes. And just, like, I know that he does some good stuff. I can't be too hard on the guy because he is trying and he is putting in the effort. And he does some good things, but he makes big mistakes, very, very silly mistakes that are hard to overlook. And anytime he doesn't have it going from a statistical standpoint, that's when the warts start to show. So if he's scoring and rebounding and blocking shots and whatnot, you can put up with the bad stuff. But when he's not, it gets ugly. So not a great game there. Jonathan Mogbo is a good defender, but he didn't score enough. Jamal Shed has been MIA for the past, 2.5 weeks, has not really looked good at all. But in general, the bench was just very poor. They were the ones that blew the lead in the first half, and in the second half, it was more of the same. They kind of blew the lead that the starters created as well. The starters were almost all in the positives this game, and the bench was almost all in the negatives. And that really just tells the story. The Raptors, I think, outplayed the Pistons in the starting lineup and then kind of got demolished off of the bench. And it was a close loss. This one really stings. I was hoping that the Raptors could have gotten their first win in a long time. This was a really good opportunity to break that losing streak against the Pistons, who look better than last season, but are not an amazing team. One flaw that is not there anymore is coaching and effort. Monty Williams was one of the most disastrous coaches of all time. Last season, if you followed the Pistons, you followed them in any capacity, the man was a joke. It was like he was trying to get fired, and spoiler alert, he did get fired and made a cool $60 million. JB Bickerstaff has been a complete breath of fresh air for that team. Got fired from the Cleveland job, and that seems to have paid off for Cleveland because under Kenny Atkinson, their offenses looked fantastic and they're still a very good defensive club. But in terms of establishing a culture, in terms of creating principles that a team requires in order to become better, establishing the right work ethic, having standards that players can't fall below, being a tough love coach, and really actually managing games in a sensible manner and having a good rotation. Like all of those things Monty Williams was horrendous at. So that was a huge upgrade for the Pistons. They're no longer the laughingstock of the league. Kudos to the Pistons, and hopefully the Toronto Raptors can find their footing at some point in the near future. They play the Boston Celtics tonight at 8 o'clock in Boston. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I've been pretty optimistic about the past 2 games. The Boston Celtics have not been quite the buzzsaw like they were last season. They're missing Porzingis. They've been a little rusty, a little championship hangover, but nothing too serious. They're playing in the TD Bank North Center. It is going to be a very, very tough game for the Toronto Raptors to win. I just want to see a competitive game. If the Toronto Raptors can keep it close and maybe have a couple of star turns from guys, maybe a bounce back night from Grady and Ochai, the other players playing well, even if it isn't a loss, I'll be okay with that. But yeah, that's the episode. When do you think the Toronto Raptors are going to win their next game? Do you think it's going to be during that 7-game home stretch? Do you think it's going to be before that? Do you think it's going to be after that? Maybe into the new year? Hopefully not, but if you have any predictions, please let me know here in the comments and also on Blue Sky. That's right, Blue Sky. That is where I'm doing most of my posting from here on out, where you can reach me at Raps Report. There's a really thriving Raptors and basketball community on there, so why don't you come on over and join us? And as always, thank you for tuning in to Raptors Report, your source for in-depth Raptors content.